I found out my storage unit had been sold at auction when I drove up to the facility on a Tuesday afternoon, and my lock was gone. My name is Felix Yates, and I had been storing boxes in Unit 217 at the Suncrest Valley Storage Facility in Henderson, Nevada for about 3 years. The unit was technically on the property managed by the Suncrest Valley Homeowners Association, one of those sprawling desert communities where the HOA seemed to have their fingers in everything. I lived in the neighborhood, so when I needed storage space, I figured using their facility would be convenient. That decision turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life, at least until it became the best thing that ever happened to me. I stood there staring at the empty lock hasp, my heart racing. The roll-up door was closed, but the padlock I had put on it was gone. In its place was a completely different lock, one of those heavy-duty master locks that cost about $40 at Home Depot. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office immediately. Suncrest Valley HOA. This is Brenda speaking, a cheerful voice answered. Yeah, hi, this is Felix Yates. I have a storage unit at your facility, number 217, and someone's changed my lock. I need to know what's going on. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Let me pull up your account, Mr. Yates. Can you give me your address? I rattled off my address on Desert Willow Drive, tapping my foot impatiently against the concrete. The Nevada sun was brutal even in March, and I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck. Oh, Brenda said, her tone shifting from cheerful to uncomfortable. Mr. Yates, it looks like that unit was sold at auction 3 days ago for non-payment of fees. What fees? I have automatic payments set up through your website. It comes out of my checking account every month. More typing. According to our records, your payment was declined in December, and we sent multiple notices to your address. When you failed to respond or bring the account current, the property was declared abandoned and sold at auction per Nevada state law. My mind was reeling. I never got any notices, and my payment wasn't declined. I get a confirmation email every single month. I'm sorry, Mr. Yates, but the sale was legal and binding. If you'd like to dispute this, you'll need to speak with our property manager, Mrs. Patterson. She handles all storage unit matters. Of course, her name was Patricia Patterson. I had dealt with her before, and she was exactly the kind of middle-aged woman who thrived on petty power. The kind who would cite you for having your trash cans out 15 minutes past the designated time or send you violation notices because your grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. She had short blonde hair, always cut in that speak-to-the-manager style, and she drove a white Escalade with a vanity plate that read HOAQN. Fine. When can I meet with her? Let me check her calendar. She has an opening tomorrow at 2 p.m. I agreed to the appointment and drove home, my mind racing. Those boxes in the storage unit contained everything from my divorce 3 years ago. Financial records, court documents, old tax returns. But most importantly, they contained every single receipt, bank statement, and communication I had ever had with the Suncrest Valley HOA. See, I had been keeping meticulous records because I had suspected for over a year that something was wrong with how the HOA was handling finances. It started small, noticing that the quarterly assessment kept going up even though our community amenities kept getting worse. The pool was always dirty, the landscaping was dying, and the promised upgrades to the clubhouse never materialized. I had started saving everything, documenting every interaction, every fee, every promise made and broken. And now all of that documentation was gone, sold to some random person at an auction I never knew was happening. When I got home, I immediately checked my email. I scrolled back through December, and sure enough, there was my confirmation email from the HOA payment portal. Payment successful. Amount $125. Date December 1st. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking slightly. I also checked my bank statements online. The payment had gone through. There it was, clear as day. A charge to Suncrest Valley HOA for $125 on December 1st. I printed everything out, building a file folder of evidence. Then, I did something I probably should have done months ago. I started looking into Nevada HOA law. I spent the entire evening reading through statutes and regulations, learning about lien procedures, auction requirements, and owner notification rules. According to Nevada Revised Statutes Section 116, an HOA had to follow very specific procedures before selling someone's property at auction. They had to send written notice by certified mail to the owner's address on file. They had to provide at least 30 days' notice before the sale. They had to itemize all fees and charges. And most importantly, they had to actually have a legitimate debt. I hadn't received any certified mail. I checked with my neighbors on both sides, asking if they had accidentally received anything addressed to me. Nothing. I even drove to the post office the next morning and spoke with the clerk, asking if there were any certified letters attempted for my address that I might have missed. The clerk checked their system and shook her head. Nothing in the past 6 months for your address requiring signature, she confirmed. Armed with this information, I showed up at the HOA office at exactly 2 p.m. the next day. The office was located in the clubhouse, a single-story stucco building that was supposed to be Mediterranean-inspired, but looked more like a rejected Taco Bell design. Inside, the air conditioning was running full blast, and the waiting area had those uncomfortable plastic chairs that every government office seems to buy in bulk. Patricia Patterson kept me waiting for 20 minutes, which I was absolutely certain was a power move. When she finally called me back to her office, she didn't stand up or offer to shake my hand. She was sitting behind her desk wearing a floral blouse and enough jewelry to stock a small boutique. Her hair was freshly highlighted, and her nails were painted a bright coral color. "Mr. Yates," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I understand you're upset about the storage unit situation." "Upset is an understatement, Mrs. Patterson. You sold my property without proper notice." She held up a perfectly manicured hand. "Now, before you make accusations, let me explain the situation. Your payment was declined in December. We sent multiple notices to your address on file. When you failed to respond for 90 days, we followed Nevada state law and auctioned the unit." I pulled out my folder and placed it on her desk. "Here's the confirmation email showing my payment went through in December. Here's my bank statement showing the charge posted. Here's the post office confirmation that no certified mail was attempted at my address. So either your records are wrong or something else is going on." Patricia's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. She glanced at the papers but didn't pick them up. "Our system shows the payment was declined." "Then your system is wrong. I want my property back." "That's not possible. The unit was sold legally at auction to a third party. The contents are now their property." "Who bought it?" "That information is confidential." I leaned forward in my chair. "Nevada law requires you to maintain public records of all lien sales and auctions. That information is not confidential. And you know it." Her expression shifted, a flash of anger crossing her face before she composed herself. "The buyer was a gentleman named Robert Chen. He paid $600 for the unit contents." $600 for a unit full of boxes that probably looked like worthless paper to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. "I want his contact information. I'll buy everything back from him." "We don't provide buyer contact information. That would be a privacy violation." "Then you contact him for me. Explain the situation and ask if he's willing to sell the contents back." Patricia picked up a pen and made a note on a pad of paper, but her body language told me she had no intention of actually doing it. "I'll see what I can do, but I can't make any promises. Is there anything else, Mr. Yates?" "Yes. I want a full accounting of my storage unit payments for the past 3 years, every charge, every payment, every fee, and I want it in writing. That will take some time to compile. You have 30 days under Nevada Public Records Law. I'll expect it by April 15th. I stood up and walked out, my heart pounding. I knew I was probably burning bridges, but at this point, I didn't care. Something was very wrong here, and I was going to figure out what it was. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with tracking down Robert Chen. Henderson wasn't that big of a city, and there couldn't be that many people with that name. I started with social media, searching Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I found 3 Robert Chens in the Henderson area, and I sent messages to all of them explaining the situation. 2 of them responded saying they had no idea what I was talking about. The 3rd never responded at all. I tried a different approach. I went back to the storage facility and started talking to other unit renters, asking if anyone had seen the auction happen. Most people had no idea there had even been an auction, but an older gentleman named Tom who rented a unit 2 doors down from mine remembered something. Yeah, I saw some guys loading boxes into a truck last Saturday morning, he said, scratching his gray beard. Didn't think much of it. Figured you were moving stuff out. What did they look like? One was Asian, maybe 30s. The other was a white guy, bigger build, wearing a Suncrest Valley HOA polo shirt. My blood ran cold. An HOA employee was helping? Yeah, I assumed he was just supervising or something. Is that not normal? I thanked Tom and walked back to my car, my mind racing. Why would an HOA employee be helping the auction buyer load boxes? That seemed unusual, to say the least. I decided to take a different approach. If I couldn't find Robert Chen, maybe I could find out more about the auction itself. I went to the Clark County Recorder's office in downtown Las Vegas, about 30 minutes from Henderson, and requested copies of all lien notices and auction advertisements filed by the Suncrest Valley HOA in the past 6 months. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, disappeared into a back room and returned 20 minutes later with a thin folder. This is everything we have on file. I opened the folder right there at the counter. There were 3 lien notices total. 2 were for homeowners who had apparently fallen behind on their HOA dues. The 3rd was for my storage unit. But something was off. The notice was dated February 15th, which should have meant the auction couldn't happen until at least March 15th, 30 days later. But according to Patricia, the auction had happened on March 18th, which was technically compliant. However, the notice listed the debt owed as $875. $875? For a storage unit that cost $125 per month, even if I had somehow missed December's payment, which I hadn't, that would only be $125, plus maybe some late fees. How did they get to $875? I paid for copies of everything and drove home, studying the documents at my kitchen table. The lien notice itemized the charges. December rent, $125, January rent, $125, February rent, $125, late fees, $150, administrative fees, $200, auction advertisement fees, $100, and legal fees, $50. But I hadn't missed December's payment, and if I hadn't missed December's payment, then January and February's payments shouldn't have been counted as missed either, since they were all on automatic payment. I pulled out my bank statements again and confirmed it. All 3 payments had gone through. December 1st, January 1st, February 1st, $125 each time, paid to Suncrest Valley HOA. Someone at the HOA was running a scam. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This was bigger than just my storage unit. If they were doing this to me, they were probably doing it to other people too. And if I was right, if those boxes in my storage unit contained all my records proving the HOA had been overcharging residents and mismanaging funds, then suddenly, the auction made a lot more sense. They hadn't sold my unit because I missed payments. They had sold it to get rid of evidence. The next morning, I did something I'd been avoiding because I knew it would make me look paranoid and crazy. I called the Henderson Police Department and asked to speak with someone about filing a fraud report. The officer who took my call sounded skeptical from the start. "Sir, HOA disputes are generally civil matters. You'd need to take this to small claims court or hire an attorney." "I understand that, but I think this goes beyond a simple dispute. I have evidence that the HOA is falsifying payment records and selling property under false pretenses. That's fraud, isn't it?" There was a long pause. "Come down to the station and file a report. We'll look into it." I drove to the Henderson Police Department on Water Street and spent 2 hours with a detective named Sarah Mills. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a no-nonsense attitude. I walked her through everything: the storage unit, the auction, the payment records, the lien notices, the missing certified mail. She took notes, copying all my documents. "This is interesting, Mr. Yates. I have to be honest, most HOA complaints we get are pretty petty. Neighbor disputes, parking complaints, that sort of thing. But this, if what you're saying is accurate, this could be criminal fraud. What happens now?" "I'll open an investigation. We'll request records from the HOA, interview the property manager, see if we can locate this Robert Chen person. But I have to warn you, these things take time, weeks, maybe months, and there's no guarantee we'll find anything prosecutable." "I understand. But there's something else you should know. The boxes that were sold at auction, they contained documentation I had been collecting on the HOA's financial mismanagement, years' worth of receipts, bank statements, communications. If I'm right about this being deliberate, then whoever bought that unit now has all the evidence. Detective Mills looked up from her notes. Evidence of what? Specifically? I think the HOA has been embezzling money. The assessments keep going up, but the property keeps deteriorating. The budgets don't make sense, and I think I wasn't the only one who noticed. I was just the only one keeping detailed records. She closed her notebook. Okay, Mr. Yates, this just got a lot more interesting. I'm going to need you to write down everything you remember about what was in those boxes, every document, every receipt, every piece of paper you can recall. Can you do that? I spent the rest of the afternoon at the police station, typing up a detailed inventory from memory. Bank statements from 2022 through 2024, copies of every HOA newsletter and budget report, photographs I had taken of deteriorating property, emails between myself and other residents discussing concerns about the finances, records of verbal promises made by HOA board members that were never fulfilled. By the time I finished, it was almost 6 p.m. Detective Mills reviewed what I had written and nodded approvingly. This is good. Very detailed. Now I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Is there any chance at all, that you're wrong about the payments? That maybe there was a technical glitch and they didn't go through? I've checked my bank statements 5 times. The money left my account. The HOA's payment portal sent me confirmation emails. Unless they're claiming those emails are fake, which I can prove they're not because they came from the HOA's actual email server, then no, I'm not wrong. She leaned back in her chair. Then someone at the HOA is committing fraud. The question is who and how widespread is it? I drove home that evening, feeling both relieved and anxious. Relieved that someone in authority was finally taking this seriously. Anxious because I had no idea what would happen next or how long it would take. In the meantime, all my evidence was sitting in someone else's possession, assuming they hadn't already thrown it all away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those boxes, wondering where they were, who had them, what they were doing with them. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I started searching for Robert Chen again, but this time I expanded my search beyond Henderson. I looked at property records, business registrations, court records, and then I found something interesting. There was a Robert Chen listed as a registered agent for a company called Desert Valley Holdings, LLC. The company had been incorporated in Nevada 6 months ago. I dug deeper, trying to find out what Desert Valley Holdings actually did, but there was almost no information available. No website, no business listings, no public records beyond the basic incorporation filing. But the incorporation filing listed an address, a residential address in Henderson on Smoke Tree Avenue. I pulled up Google Maps and looked at the street view. It was a house in a neighborhood about 3 miles from mine. A typical single-story ranch home with desert landscaping and a 2-car garage. I knew I was probably crossing a line, but I didn't care anymore. The next morning, I drove to Smoke Tree Avenue and parked down the street from the address. I didn't have a plan exactly. I just wanted to see if anyone was home, maybe try to talk to them. I sat in my car for about 30 minutes, drinking coffee from a travel mug and feeling increasingly stupid. What was I even doing? Stalking some random person's house because they might have bought my storage unit. This was how people ended up with restraining orders. Just as I was about to leave, the garage door opened and a man walked out carrying a box. He was Asian, probably in his 30s, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He loaded the box into the back of a silver Honda CR-V, then went back into the garage for another box. My heart started racing. Those looked like my boxes, the same size, the same brown color, the same type of packing tape. I got out of my car and walked up the driveway before I could second-guess myself. "Excuse me, are you Robert Chen?" The man turned around, startled. "Yeah, who's asking?" "My name is Felix Yates. I think you bought my storage unit at auction a couple weeks ago." His expression shifted from surprise to understanding, then to something that looked like guilt. "Oh, man. Yeah, I did. Listen, I had no idea there was any problem with the sale. The HOA said it was a legal auction. Everything was above board." It wasn't. They sold it without proper notice, and I never missed any payments. Those boxes contain personal documents I need back. I'll pay you whatever you want for them." Robert set down the box he was holding and rubbed his face. "This is really awkward. Look, I bought the unit as an investment, hoping there'd be something valuable in there. But it was just boxes of papers, receipts, bank statements, boring stuff. I was actually about to take it all to the dump." "Please don't. Those documents are extremely important to me. Name your price." He looked at the boxes in his garage thinking, "I paid $600 at the auction. Plus, I had to rent a truck to move everything. That was another $100. And I spent a whole day going through boxes looking for anything valuable. So I'm out probably $800 total, plus my time. I'll give you $1,500, cash. Today." Robert's eyes widened. $1,500 for boxes of old papers? They're personal documents, financial records from my divorce. I need them back. He studied my face, trying to decide if I was serious or crazy. "Okay, man. Yeah, okay. $1,500 cash and you can have all of it. I haven't thrown anything away yet. It's all still in my garage." I drove to my bank and withdrew $1,500, my hands shaking slightly as I counted out the cash. This was a huge amount of money for me, more than I really had to spare. But those documents were worth more than that. They were worth everything. When I got back to Robert's house, he had pulled all the boxes out into the driveway. There were 11 boxes total, exactly as I remembered. I started counting out the cash while Robert watched, looking both confused and pleased. "Can I ask you something?" he said as I handed him the money. "Why are old receipts and bank statements worth $1,500 to you? Is this like a tax thing?" "It's a long story, but basically, I've been documenting evidence that my HOA is committing fraud. These boxes contain years' worth of proof. They sold my storage unit to get rid of the evidence, but I don't think they knew you bought it. They probably thought it would end up in a dumpster somewhere." Robert's expression changed. "Whoa, that's heavy. So you're going after them legally?" "I am. There's already a police investigation started." He nodded slowly, then glanced at the boxes. I did look through some of this stuff before I realized it was all just financial documents. I saw some emails that seemed pretty shady. People talking about moving money around, hiding expenses. I didn't really understand what I was looking at, but it seemed sketchy. "Do you remember any specific names?" "Not really. There was one email chain that mentioned someone named Patricia, and there was another one about some property management company. I think it was called Desert something. Desert Valley Management, maybe?" Desert Valley, like Desert Valley Holdings, the company Robert's name was registered to. My mind started racing. "Robert, can I ask you something? How did you find out about the auction?" "The HOA called me directly. Said they had a storage unit going up for auction and asked if I was interested in bidding on it." "They called you? How did they get your name?" He looked uncomfortable. "I run a small business buying storage units and estate sales, trying to flip stuff. I have an LLC set up for it, Desert Valley Holdings. I guess they found me somehow and cold called me about the auction." "Was there actually an auction? Like, with multiple bidders?" Robert shook his head. "No, it was just me. They gave me a private preview of the unit. I made an offer of $600, and they accepted it on the spot. There was no public auction or anything, just a private sale." Everything clicked into place. There had never been a real auction. The HOA had orchestrated a fake sale to a company they probably thought they could control or that would dispose of the evidence. But they had picked the wrong Robert Chen, or he wasn't in on their scheme, and now all the evidence was about to come back to haunt them. "Robert, I need you to document everything you just told me. Write it down, sign it, date it. The police are going to want to talk to you." "The police? Man, I don't want to get involved in any legal stuff." "You're already involved. You were part of a fraudulent auction, but you're also a witness, and your testimony could help prove what the HOA did was criminal." "Please, I need your help." He hesitated, then finally nodded. "Okay, yeah, I'll write everything down. This is crazy, man. I just wanted to make a few bucks flipping storage units." I loaded all 11 boxes into my car, filling the back seat and trunk completely. Then Robert went inside and came back with 2 handwritten pages detailing everything he remembered about the HOA contacting him, the private showing, the payment, everything. He signed and dated both pages and gave them to me. As I drove away, I felt like I had just won the lottery. I had my evidence back. Everything I needed to prove the HOA was corrupt was sitting in my car right now. I drove straight to the police station and asked for Detective Mills. She came out to the lobby looking surprised to see me. "Mr. Yates, I wasn't expecting you. We're still in the early stages of the investigation. I got my boxes back." Her eyebrows shot up. "What? How?" I explained everything, finding Robert Chen, buying back the boxes, learning that the auction was actually a private sale, getting his written statement. Detective Mills listened with growing interest, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, she was actually grinning. "Mr. Yates, this is exactly the break we needed. That statement from Chen proves the HOA lied about conducting a public auction. That's fraud, right there in black and white. Can you bring those boxes to my office? I'd like to go through them with you." We spent the next 4 hours in a conference room at the police station, going through every single box. I explained each document, each receipt, each piece of evidence. Detective Mills took photographs and notes, occasionally stopping to ask questions or request clarification. The picture that emerged was damning. For at least 2 years, the Suncrest Valley HOA had been systematically overcharging residents, falsifying budget reports, and funneling money to shell companies. There were invoices for landscaping work that was never done, receipts for pool maintenance from a company that didn't exist, budget items for capital improvements that never materialized. And at the center of it all was Patricia Patterson. Her signature was on dozens of fraudulent documents. Her email address appeared in countless sketchy exchanges. She had been stealing from the HOA, from all of us, for years. But she wasn't working alone. There were at least 3 other people involved, including the HOA board president, a man named Gerald Morrison, and the HOA attorney, a woman named Lisa Huang. "This is huge," Detective Mills said, leaning back in her chair. "This isn't just some petty fraud. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from homeowners over multiple years. This is going to involve the FBI." "The FBI? Wire fraud, mail fraud, potentially money laundering if they were moving money between accounts to hide the theft. Yeah, this is federal territory now, but don't worry, we'll stay involved locally. I'm going to request a warrant for the HOA's financial records, and we'll need to bring in a forensic accountant to trace all the money." Over the next 2 weeks, everything exploded. The police executed a search warrant on the HOA office, seizing computers, files, and financial records. Patricia Patterson was brought in for questioning, along with Gerald Morrison and Lisa Huang. The FBI opened an official investigation into potential wire fraud and money laundering. The story broke in the local news. "Henderson HOA under investigation for fraud," read the headline in the Las Vegas Review-Journal. My phone started ringing off the hook with calls from other Suncrest Valley residents who had suspected something was wrong but didn't know what to do. A lawyer named Marcus Reynolds reached out to me. He specialized in HOA law and class action lawsuits. "Mr. Yates, based on what I've read in the news, I think you and your neighbors have grounds for a major lawsuit against the HOA board and their management company. Would you be willing to speak with me about being a lead plaintiff?" I met with Marcus at his office in Las Vegas, a sleek high-rise with views of the Strip. He was in his 50s with graying hair and an expensive suit, but he had a down-to-earth way of talking that put me at ease. "Here's the situation," he explained, pulling up documents on his computer. "Based on the evidence the police have gathered and the records you've provided, it looks like the HOA defrauded homeowners of approximately $1.2 million over 3 years. That money was supposed to go toward maintaining the property, but instead, it went into the pockets of Patterson, Morrison, Huang, and probably a few others. Can we get that money back?" "That's what I intend to find out. We'll file a class action lawsuit on behalf of all Suncrest Valley homeowners. We'll go after the HOA's insurance policy, which should cover at least some of the losses. We'll also go after personal assets of the individuals involved. But I have to warn you, this is going to be a long process. We're talking years, not months." "I'm prepared for that. I just want them held accountable." Marcus nodded. "Good. Because they are going to fight this hard. People don't steal over $1 million and then just roll over when they get caught. Expect legal motions, delays, dirty tactics. But the evidence you've preserved, Mr. Yates, that's our ace in the hole. They can't deny what's right there in black and white. The criminal investigation moved faster than the civil lawsuit. In June, about 3 months after the storage unit auction, Patricia Patterson was arrested at her home and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The arrest was captured by news cameras, showing Patricia in handcuffs being led to a police car while she screamed about her rights and demanded to speak to her attorney. Gerald Morrison was arrested the same day, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding and abetting embezzlement. Lisa Huang was arrested a week later after initially fleeing to California, adding charges of flight to avoid prosecution. The arraignments were held at the Regional Justice Center in downtown Las Vegas. I attended all of them, sitting in the gallery and watching as the 3 people who had been stealing from me and my neighbors stood before a judge and entered not guilty pleas. Patricia's attorney argued that she had done nothing wrong, that all financial decisions had been approved by the board, and that any discrepancies were the result of accounting errors, not criminal intent. It was laughable, given the evidence. The judge set bail at $100,000 for Patricia, $75,000 for Gerald, and $150,000 for Lisa because of her flight risk. All 3 posted bail within days, but they were fitted with ankle monitors and ordered not to leave Clark County. The trial was scheduled for January of the following year, about 8 months away. In the meantime, the FBI investigation uncovered even more evidence. They traced money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They found fake invoices from shell companies. They discovered that Patricia had used HOA funds to pay for a vacation home in Lake Tahoe and a luxury car for her daughter. The civil lawsuit moved forward as well. Marcus filed the class action in August, and over 300 Suncrest Valley homeowners joined as plaintiffs. The damages we were seeking totaled nearly $2 million once you factored in property value depreciation, increased assessments, and punitive damages. The HOA's insurance company initially tried to deny coverage, arguing that fraud wasn't covered under their policy. But Marcus fought back, pointing to specific clauses in the insurance contract that he argued required coverage. Eventually, the insurance company settled, agreeing to pay $800,000 toward the lawsuit, but that still left over $1 million in damages unaccounted for. Marcus filed liens against Patricia's house, Gerald's investment properties, and Lisa's law practice. We froze their bank accounts and started the process of liquidating their assets. Through all of this, I became something of a local celebrity. News outlets interviewed me. HOA reform groups invited me to speak at their meetings. I testified before the Nevada state legislature about the need for stronger HOA oversight and regulations. It was surreal, going from being a regular guy who just wanted his storage boxes back to being the face of HOA reform in Nevada. But I didn't mind. If my experience could help prevent this from happening to other people, it was worth it. The criminal trial began on January 8th. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence, including all the documents from my storage boxes, the financial records seized from the HOA office, testimony from the forensic accountant, and statements from Robert Chen about the fraudulent auction. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had been following orders from the board, that she was just an employee doing what she was told. But the evidence showed she had been the one orchestrating most of the fraud. She had created the fake invoices, set up the shell companies, moved the money around. Gerald's attorney tried a different approach, arguing that Gerald was too trusting and had simply signed documents without reading them carefully. But the prosecution produced emails showing Gerald actively participating in discussions about how to hide the stolen money. Lisa's defense was that she had provided legal advice in good faith and wasn't aware any fraud was occurring. But her emails told a different story, showing her helping Patricia and Gerald structure their transactions to avoid detection. I testified on the 4th day of trial. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Jennifer Kim, walked me through everything. How I had started noticing financial irregularities, how I had begun documenting evidence, how my storage unit had been sold in a fraudulent auction, how I had tracked down Robert Chen and bought back my boxes. Patricia's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to make me seem paranoid and obsessive. "Mr. Yates, Isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against Mrs. Patterson, that you've been harassing her for years with frivolous complaints?" "No, that's not true. I documented legitimate concerns about HOA financial mismanagement. That's not harassment. That's being a responsible homeowner." "But you kept boxes and boxes of receipts and documents. That seems excessive, doesn't it? Obsessive, even." "It seems prudent, given that those documents proved Mrs. Patterson was stealing from me and my neighbors." The attorney tried to rattle me, but I stayed calm. I had the truth on my side, and nothing he said could change that. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back with verdicts, I was sitting in the courtroom next to Detective Mills. Patricia Patterson, guilty on all counts, 17 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. Gerald Morrison, guilty on 14 of 16 counts. Lisa Huang, guilty on 8 of 12 counts. Patricia burst into tears when the verdict was read. Gerald sat stone-faced, staring at the table. Lisa actually looked relieved, probably because she had beaten some of the charges. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The prosecution recommended significant prison time, arguing that the defendants had betrayed the trust of hundreds of families and stolen money that should have been used to maintain their homes and property. Patricia received 15 years in federal prison. Gerald received 10 years. Lisa received 5 years, but would be eligible for parole after 2. They were also ordered to pay full restitution, which meant every penny of the stolen money that could be recovered would be returned to the homeowners. The judge issued a statement saying that HOA board members and managers hold positions of trust and that violations of that trust would be punished severely. The civil lawsuit settled 3 months later. Between the insurance payout, the criminal restitution, and the liquidation of the defendant's assets, we recovered about $1.4 million. After legal fees and expenses, each homeowner in Suncrest Valley received approximately $3,800. It wasn't everything we had lost, but it was something. More importantly, Patricia, Gerald, and Lisa were in prison. They would never manage an HOA again. They would never steal from homeowners again. The Nevada legislature passed new HOA regulations largely inspired by what happened in Suncrest Valley. HOAs would now be required to have independent financial audits every year. Board members would need to complete training on fiduciary duty and ethical governance, and homeowners would have easier access to HOA records and more power to recall board members who abuse their authority. I was invited to the bill signing ceremony at the state capitol in Carson City. The governor thanked me for bringing attention to HOA fraud and abuse, saying my persistence and documentation had helped create meaningful reform. Standing there in the Capitol building, I thought about that day I drove to my storage unit and found my lock gone. At the time, it had felt like a disaster. I had been angry and scared, worried about losing years' worth of evidence. But the HOA, selling my storage unit, had been the best thing they could have done for my case. It proved their intent to destroy evidence. It showed their willingness to break the law. It gave us a clear fraud charge that was easy to prosecute. If they had just left my storage unit alone, I might have eventually given up on trying to prove they were corrupt. The investigation might have fizzled out for lack of clear evidence. But by selling my unit at a fake auction, they had handed me everything I needed to take them down. Robert Chen and I actually became friends through all of this. He testified at the trial, and afterward, we grabbed dinner. He joked that buying my storage unit had been the most eventful business transaction of his life. "I'm sticking to estate sales from now on," he said, laughing. "Storage units are too much drama." I moved out of Suncrest Valley about a year after the trial ended. Too many memories, too much stress associated with the neighborhood. I bought a condo in Summerlin, a different part of Las Vegas, with a much smaller and less powerful HOA. But I stayed in touch with many of my former neighbors. We had formed a bond through the lawsuit and the criminal trial, a shared experience of fighting back against corruption and winning. We had proven that homeowners don't have to just accept HOA abuse. We had shown that documentation matters, that persistence matters, that standing up for what's right matters. Detective Mills sent me a message after Patricia was sentenced. "You did good, Felix. You didn't let them get away with it. You held them accountable. That takes courage." I appreciated the sentiment, but I didn't feel particularly courageous. I'd just been a guy who kept receipts and got angry when someone tried to steal from him. Everything that followed from that was just logical consequences. Marcus Reynolds told me I should write a book about the experience. People need to hear this story. They need to know that HOA fraud is real and that they can fight back. Maybe I will write that book someday. But for now, I'm content knowing that Patricia Patterson is in prison, that hundreds of homeowners got at least some of their money back, and that Nevada HOA law is stronger because of what we went through. I still keep meticulous records of everything, by the way. Old habits die hard. My new condo's HOA is honest and well run, but I still save every receipt, every bank statement, every email. Because you never know when you might need to prove something. And I tell everyone I meet, if you live in an HOA community, document everything. Keep copies of all your payments. Save all your correspondence. Take photos of property conditions. Because if something goes wrong, if you suspect fraud or abuse, those records will be the only thing standing between you and people who think they can get away with anything. The storage unit that started this whole saga is still there at the Suncrest Valley facility. I drove past it once, months after everything was over, just to look at it. Unit 217, with a new lock on it and a new renter inside. I wondered if they knew the history, if they had any idea what that little storage unit represented. It represented justice, eventually. It represented the idea that no one is above the law, not even HOA board members who think they're untouchable. It represented the power of documentation and persistence. My storage unit had been sold at auction to hide evidence of fraud, but that auction had backfired spectacularly, leading directly to criminal convictions and civil liability. In trying to destroy the evidence, the HOA had actually preserved it and made their crimes even more obvious. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Robert Chen had thrown away those boxes before I found him. If I had been a few days slower in tracking him down, if he had taken everything to the dump like he planned, the investigation might have continued based on my memory and the records police seized from the HOA office, but it would have been harder, less clear-cut. Luck had been on my side in that respect, but I had also made my own luck by keeping such detailed records in the first place, by being organized and thorough, by not just complaining about HOA problems, but actually documenting them methodically. There's a saying that the best revenge is living well. In my case, the best revenge was living well and also sending the people who tried to steal from me to federal prison. I'm not ashamed to admit I felt satisfaction watching Patricia being led away in handcuffs. She had been so smug, so certain that homeowners would never figure out what she was doing, that even if they did figure it out, they wouldn't have proof, and that even if they had proof, the system would protect her. She had been wrong on all counts. The system did work, eventually. It took time, effort, and a lot of people doing their jobs well. Detective Mills conducting a thorough investigation, Jennifer Kim prosecuting the case aggressively, Marcus Reynolds fighting for homeowners in civil court, the FBI following the money trail, the judge imposing serious sentences. But none of that would have happened without those 11 boxes from my storage unit. Without every receipt I had saved, every email I had printed, every photograph I had taken. That documentation was the foundation everything else was built on. So to anyone reading this, whether you're in an HOA community or any other situation where someone holds power over you, my advice is simple. Keep records. Document everything. Save every email, every text message, every piece of paper that crosses your path. Because someday, maybe tomorrow or maybe years from now, you might need to prove something. And when that day comes, you'll be glad you kept the receipts. In my case, I'm not just glad I kept the receipts, I'm glad the HOA was stupid enough to sell them at auction. Because that single act of attempted evidence destruction became the smoking gun that proved their guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Patricia Patterson probably lies awake at night in her prison cell, thinking about what a huge mistake that was. How if she had just left my storage unit alone, if she had just continued taking my automatic payments like normal, she might have gotten away with everything. The investigation might never have happened. The evidence might have stayed in those boxes forever, forgotten and irrelevant. But she got greedy and paranoid. She saw those boxes as a threat and decided to eliminate them. And in doing so, she eliminated any chance of getting away with her crimes. That's the thing about criminals, even white-collar criminals who think they're smarter than everyone else. They make mistakes, they overreach, they panic and do something stupid that ends up being their undoing. For Patricia, that something stupid was selling my storage unit at a fake auction. For me, it was the beginning of the end of her criminal enterprise and the start of justice for hundreds of homeowners who had been victimized. Looking back now, I can see how every piece fell into place. Finding Robert Chen, getting the boxes back, Detective Mills taking the case seriously, the FBI getting involved, the evidence being overwhelming, the jury seeing through the defense attorney's tricks, the judge imposing serious sentences, the civil lawsuit recovering money for victims. It was like dominoes falling, one after another, each event leading inevitably to the next. And it all started with that moment when I drove up to my storage unit and saw my lock was gone. If someone had told me that day that 3 years later I would be testifying before the state legislature about HOA reform, I would have thought they were crazy. If someone had told me I would recover my boxes, expose a massive fraud scheme, and help send 3 people to federal prison, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. Because I didn't give up. Because I kept fighting. Because I trusted the evidence and the system and my own instincts that something was very, very wrong. And because the people who tried to cheat me made the fatal mistake of selling the one thing that could prove their guilt. My storage unit, Unit 217, the most important collection of boxes anyone has ever paid $1,500 for. I still have those boxes, by the way. They're in my condo now, in a closet, carefully organized and labeled. I'll probably never need them again. The criminal trial's over, the civil lawsuit is settled, the reforms are passed, but I keep them anyway. Because they're proof. Proof that documentation matters, proof that ordinary people can fight back against corruption, proof that justice, while sometimes slow, does eventually prevail, and proof that sometimes when someone tries to destroy evidence against them, they actually end up preserving it in the most dramatic and ironic way possible. Every time I look at those boxes, I smile, because I know that somewhere in a federal prison, Patricia Patterson is thinking about them too. Thinking about how those boxes, which she tried so hard to get rid of, ended up being the reason she's spending 15 years behind bars. That's justice. That's karma. That's what happens when you mess with someone who keeps receipts. And I will always, always keep receipts.